What's going on, guys? Welcome to this episode of Home Built Workshop. It is school picture time again. That means we need a picture frame. Today we're going to build a very simple picture frame, but the challenge for today's project is to build it with zero measuring. Think we can do it? I think so. Stick around. So how many of you guys have ever found yourself in this situation? You've had a picture frame fall off the wall, break into pieces, and now you're only left with this little cardboard backer piece. Now you need to make a replacement frame that fits this exactly. Now I've made several different videos on making picture frames featuring different ways that you can miter the joints, and this really isn't going to be much different, but I think a fun challenge would be to not use any tape measures and only use this to get our dimensions. No measuring involved. I think we can do it. What do you think? Let's get started. To make this no measure frame, I've got this piece of aspen here that I think is plenty thick that we can rip it down into strips to get our base stock. But first, I need to straighten this edge before ripping it down. Before I rip this down to strips, I realize there's a knot right here, and since at the moment I don't know where this knot's going to land in the project, I want to fill that in. I'm going to use some of this really cool brown super glue. It's going to fill that in really nicely. Starbond is my super glue of choice. If you guys are interested in checking out some of the products, there's a link in the description. You can get 10% off your order. Really good stuff, and I like that they come with extra tips. There's nothing more frustrating than going to use your super glue only to find out that the tip has clogged shut full of glue. You can replace it. Pretty cool. And now I'll rip the piece down into roughly 1-inch wide strips. I didn't measure, but it's pretty close. I'm going to use my little router table to cut the rabbet, which will hold the back panel, the picture, as well as some acrylic for the front. I used the actual materials to set the height of the router bit, making sure the bit is actually higher than the material. Then I installed the fence, making sure that part of the router bit is buried into the wooden fence. That way I can only cut a little bit at a time. And now I'll just make several light passes, moving the fence in between each pass until I get to the depth that I need. And that depth is really not a specific number because we're not measuring, but it's roughly 1/4 of an inch. And now I'll switch out my router bit to a chamfer and just cut a small chamfer around the inside edge of these pieces. I'm going to leave the router bit set up because I'm going to use this again later. Now it's time to set up the miter sled on the table saw so we can start cutting some 45-degree angles. The first cut's going to be really easy because all we need to do is put that first angle on there before we actually have to measure. This one has a little knot right here. I'm going to cut that off. That is not the one that I filled. As I've cut these, I've marked them with a right and a left. When you're using a miter sled, it's important that one side of the miter is cut on the left side of the blade and the other side on the right. With a sled like this, that way if the fence is off a little bit, as long as you cut them on opposite sides, you're going to end up with a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to first match up one corner. Then I can drop my back panel in place. I'll make a couple of pencil marks. That's where the end of our cut needs to be. It's important you pay attention and make these cuts with the angles going the right way. You don't want to mistakenly cut this angle going this way. Not that I've ever done that or anything, but just so you guys know. As I'm editing this, I realize it's kind of hard to see exactly what I'm doing, so I wanted to try to jump in and make a few clarifications just to make sure it's really clear. This is an area where I have made the cuts in the wrong place before, and I want to try to make sure you guys don't have that same problem. Let's pretend this piece of wood represents the frame piece and this pencil line represents the rabbet. Let's say the rabbet's right here. If I mark out where I need to cut my miter, right there. Now, when I cut my 45-degree angle, I want it to intersect the back edge of the rabbet. If you make it out here, your piece is gonna be too long because this is the corner of your rabbet. So when you cut that, you want your cut to come right to that mark right here, not the outside edge. You need to remember to account for the thickness of your rabbet. Our actual inside length is gonna be calculated from the back edge of the rabbet, right here. Sometimes what I'll end up doing is making the cut larger and then sneaking up on it by making a few really light passes. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it that way. A lot of times I feel that it's a lot easier that way because it's really easy just to make a couple of light cuts until you sneak up on that mark right there, rather than trying to eyeball it, because you don't really have anything out here to mark where your cut's gonna go. Now there's some math and formulas and things, but who's got time for that? Make sure you mark your ends so you know what side you cut it on. When you cut the piece that's going to meet up with this, it has to be cut on the left side of the blade. This is the cut that I just made. This offcut's long enough to get another side piece out of, but I need to cut this 45-degree angle on the opposite side of the blade. For this cut, I don't need to measure anything because I need this angle first before we can measure where our end cut's gonna be. But it's important to cut this on the right side of the blade because we just made this cut on the left.
Now I'll just cut the remainder of the pieces to length after marking them out based on the size of the cardboard backer. A couple of the pieces I had to just make some small shallow cuts to sneak up on the size.
There we go. Got everything cut to length. I'm going to use one of these strap clamps to hold it all together. It has these little guides on here that kind of makes it self-squaring almost. Makes it really easy to glue up something like this. So now I can set this thing aside to dry while I cut the acrylic panel for the front. You could use glass if you want to, and I've done that several times in the past, but I don't have any glass. I do have this acrylic, so we're going to use what we have on hand.
In keeping with the theme of no measurements required, I'm using the backer to set the fence on my table saw. Now this acrylic is a lot thicker than what I would need for this project, but like I said, it's what I have on hand, so it's what we're using.
Now that the glue is dry, we'll just unclamp this frame.
And then using my same chamfer setup at the router table, I'll run a small chamfer around the outside edge. And for the most exciting part of the whole project, not really, but it's necessary. I am not going to reinforce my miters with dowels or splines. The glue joint's going to be perfectly strong, but if you wanted to do that, now would be the time.
Shake well before using. One of the big reasons that I like using spray lacquer for projects is because it dries so fast. You don't have to wait days and days for a finish to dry, really just an hour or two, and you can assemble your project. To hold the back in place, you have a couple of options. The easiest probably would just be to use some small finishing nails, drive them in along the side to hold everything in place. There's also hand-operated guns that will insert the little tabs that you often see on picture frames. That's what I'm going to use, but I happen to have this pneumatic version. Pop those guys right in there, hold it in place perfect. And There we have it, guys. Our frame is complete. What do you think, kiddo?
I like the frame.
Cool. I do too. I like the way the frame and everything came out. What a fun challenge trying to do it without measuring. It's definitely something that we don't typically do, and kind of fun to kind of not measure once in a while. Just be cautious of the size of the backer. I think this one was in some sort of an oversized frame, so I had to trim a little bit on the matting and stuff, but overall, really happy with the way this thing turned out and a fun project to do. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. I need Hayley here to do this end. I see you. What? Oh, that wasn't holding.
That was dropping.